In 1952, the U.S. government launched a secretive investigation into UFOs. It was called Project Blue Book. Over 12,000 sightings. Most were explained, some were not. But then, the program vanished, or so they say. Part 1. The Origins. In the years following World War II, America stood at the dawn of a new era, one defined by jet engines, nuclear tension, and a sky that no longer felt empty. It was the summer of 1947 when a private pilot named Kenneth Arnold reported seeing 9 strange, disc-shaped objects flying in formation near Mount Rainier, Washington. He said they moved like saucers skipping across water. The press took that phrase and ran with it. "Flying saucers," the headline screamed, and just like that, a new kind of fear took flight. That same summer, something crashed on a ranch outside Roswell, New Mexico. The Army first claimed it was a flying disc, then quickly retracted the statement, saying it was nothing more than a weather balloon. But rumors persisted. Whispers of debris, bodies, and a cover-up spread like wildfire. For many Americans, this wasn't just a curiosity. It was a question of national security. Behind closed doors, the military agreed. In 1948, the U.S. Air Force quietly launched Project Sign, its first official study of unidentified flying objects. The initial goal was simple: determine if these sightings represented a threat. The findings? Mixed. Some analysts believed the objects were real and potentially extraterrestrial. Others dismissed them outright. The final report was inconclusive, too inconclusive for the Pentagon's liking. Project Sign was soon shut down, replaced by Project Grudge, which took a more skeptical tone. The objective shifted: calm the public, debunk the phenomena, and control the narrative. But the sightings didn't stop. By 1952, the volume of reports had grown too large to ignore. That year, the Air Force recorded over 1,500 UFO sightings, including mass sightings in Washington, D.C., where mysterious lights appeared over the Capitol for 2 consecutive weekends. Fighter jets were scrambled. Radar operators were baffled. The public was unnerved. To respond to the growing crisis, and to manage both perception and panic, the U.S. Air Force established Project Blue Book. Based out of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio, it would become the government's longest-running official UFO investigation. At the helm was a man named Captain Edward Ruppelt, who sought a scientific approach. He coined the term UFO as a more neutral replacement for flying saucer, and he brought on academics to help analyze sightings. One of them was Dr. J. Allen Hynek, an astronomer from Northwestern University. Hired as a consultant, Hynek was a skeptic. He believed the sightings were the result of misidentified planets, meteors, and aircraft. But something began to shift. As Hynek reviewed hundreds of reports, some from commercial pilots, military officers, and radar operators, he found that not all could be explained. Some defied logic. Some appeared to defy physics. Behind closed doors, Blue Book investigators knew they were walking a fine line: reassure the public, protect classified technology, and avoid admitting ignorance. And above all, maintain control of the skies, at least on paper. By the time Blue Book was fully operational, thousands of reports were flooding in. Most were dismissed. Some were cataloged as unexplained. A few disappeared entirely. Blue Book would go on to investigate over 12,000 cases. It became the face of America's response to the UFO phenomenon. But many believed, and still believe, that it was never meant to find the truth, only to bury it. Part 2. The Investigations. Project Blue Book officially began in 1952. Over the next 17 years, it would investigate more than 12,000 sightings across the United States and abroad. Most were dismissed as weather balloons, aircraft, celestial misidentifications, or elaborate hoaxes, but not all of them. Of the 12,618 documented cases, 701 remained unexplained. These were not the vague, blurry lights reported by anonymous callers. These were incidents backed by physical evidence, radar confirmation, trained pilots and military personnel as witnesses, sightings that occurred in broad daylight and involved multiple observers across different vantage points, encounters that defied conventional explanation, and in some cases, conventional physics. Let's start with one of the earliest and most unsettling, the Lubbock Lights. In August 1951, in Lubbock, Texas, before Blue Book was formally established, a group of respected professors from Texas Tech University witnessed something extraordinary. They were sitting outside one evening when a series of glowing blue-white lights flew silently overhead in a precise V-shaped formation. They knew what aircraft looked like. This was not that. Over the following nights, dozens of locals reported the same thing. One witness, a college student named Carl Hart Jr., captured 5 photographs of the lights. The Air Force analyzed them and declared they were not a hoax. But they offered no explanation for what the lights actually were. The case remained unsolved, quietly shelved. Then came the Kinross incident in November 1953. An F-89 Scorpion interceptor was scrambled from Kinross Air Force Base in Michigan to investigate a radar contact over Lake Superior. The pilot, Lieutenant Felix Moncla, and radar operator, Second Lieutenant Robert Wilson, were sent to intercept what was believed to be an unidentified aircraft violating U.S. airspace. Ground control tracked the jet as it closed in on the object. Then something strange happened. On radar, the blips of the Scorpion and the unknown craft merged into one. Seconds later, both disappeared. No explosion, no emergency transmission, no wreckage was ever recovered. Moncla and Wilson were never seen again. The Air Force later claimed the object was a Canadian cargo plane, but the Canadian government denied this. To this day, the Kinross incident remains one of the most disturbing disappearances in Blue Book's records, and it was far from the last. Take the Mantell incident, for example, another case that would haunt Blue Book's early investigators. On January 7, 1948, just months before Project Sign transitioned to Project Grudge, Captain Thomas Mantell, a decorated World War II pilot, was ordered to intercept a large metallic object reported near Fort Knox, Kentucky. He climbed to over 25,000 feet, chasing what he described as a tremendous circular craft. Ground control lost contact. Minutes later, Mantell's plane disintegrated in midair and crashed. He was killed instantly. His body was found in the wreckage. The Air Force initially suggested he was chasing Venus, visible in the afternoon sky. But astronomers quickly dismissed that claim. Later, they blamed a top-secret balloon. But the explanations shifted, and the Air Force's public narrative became increasingly difficult to believe, especially when internal memos showed they had no firm conclusion at all. These early cases set the tone for Blue Book. Explain away what you can, downplay what you can't, and suppress anything that might cause panic. And yet, behind the scenes, investigators were taking the phenomenon seriously. Captain Edward Ruppelt, who led Blue Book from 1952 to 1953, was a pragmatic officer. He pushed for a more rigorous scientific approach to UFOs and even coined the term unidentified flying object to replace the more sensationalized flying saucer. Under his leadership, Blue Book adopted standardized procedures for evaluating reports. Ruppelt believed that some sightings were worthy of genuine investigation. He brought on outside consultants, including Dr. J. Allen Hynek, an astronomer from Northwestern University. At first, Hynek was the classic skeptic. He believed UFO reports were simple misidentifications: Venus, meteors, aircraft, even hoaxes. But the deeper he dug, the harder it became to explain everything away. Over the next decade, Hynek reviewed hundreds of reports. Some were clearly explainable, but others, particularly those involving multiple witnesses, radar confirmation, and high-speed aerial maneuvers, began to challenge his assumptions. He started to believe that Blue Book was filtering reality through a political lens. And he wasn't alone. In 1955, the Air Force released Special Report Number 14, a comprehensive statistical analysis of over 3,000 UFO cases. The report claimed that 90% of sightings had mundane explanations. But a deeper look revealed something more troubling. The cases deemed unexplained were also the ones reported by the most credible observers: pilots, military officers, engineers. And the more experience a witness had, the more likely their sighting was to remain unexplained. Even more curious, the report showed that unexplained sightings had higher reliability ratings than those with clear explanations. Rather than publicize these contradictions, the Air Force buried the report's implications under a press release that framed it as proof that UFOs were not real. The media followed suit. The public remained skeptical, but few had access to the full data. Still, the sightings didn't stop. In 1964, police officer Lonnie Zamora in Socorro, New Mexico, reported seeing an egg-shaped craft land in the desert. He observed two small humanoid figures near it before it lifted off with a roar and vanished. The landing site had scorched vegetation and strange markings in the soil. The case was investigated extensively and remains unexplained. In 1966, a wave of sightings across Michigan caused a media frenzy. Dr. Hynek, still consulting for Blue Book, was sent to investigate. Under pressure to deliver a calming explanation, he blamed the reports on swamp gas. The phrase became a national punchline and a symbol of official denial. Public frustration peaked. Even then, Congressman Gerald Ford called for a formal inquiry. In response, the Air Force commissioned the Condon Committee, an academic study led by physicist Edward Condon at the University of Colorado. From the beginning, the Condon Committee was seen by many as biased. Internal memos revealed that some members believed the goal was to debunk UFOs from the outset. In 1968, the committee's final report concluded that further study of UFOs was not scientifically useful. With that, the Air Force had its out. In 1969, Project Blue Book was officially shut down. The Air Force declared that UFOs posed no threat to national security, that there was no evidence of advanced technology, and that there was no cover-up. But those three conclusions weren't universally accepted. Researchers noticed inconsistencies. Some cases referenced documents that were missing from the archive. Entire reports appeared to vanish. Witnesses recanted statements, or were never heard from again. And Hynek, now a full convert, went on to establish the Center for UFO Studies. He would later say that the Air Force's true objective was never to solve the mystery, only to make it disappear. Behind the scenes, intelligence insiders hinted at something else, that surveillance continued, that secret programs replaced Blue Book under different names, that what the public saw was just the tip of a much larger, deeply classified iceberg. By the early 1970s, the term UFO was fading from government vocabulary, but the sightings never stopped. They were just routed elsewhere. Project Blue Book may have ended on paper, but for many, it was never about closure. It was about containment. And if you believe the right people, the real investigation never ended at all. Part 3. Fallout, Legacy, and What Was Left Behind. When Project Blue Book officially shut down in December of 1969, the message to the American public was clear: nothing to see here. The Air Force concluded that UFOs posed no threat to national security, that there was no evidence of advanced technology beyond our own, and that there was certainly no indication of extraterrestrial visitation. For the government, this was the end of the story. But for many others, it was just the beginning. Because Blue Book didn't answer every question, it buried many. And what was buried has a way of coming back. Let's start with what was made public. After Blue Book closed, its files were declassified. Over 12,000 reports were archived and eventually made accessible to researchers and journalists. These files included witness statements, photographs, maps, and handwritten notes. Anyone willing to dig could now explore the government's official history of unidentified flying objects. But as investigators pored over the documents, they noticed something strange: missing references, contradictory timelines, and, most notably, entire cases that were either heavily redacted or missing altogether. For example, some case numbers referenced reports that were never released. Other files were so sanitized that critical details, like witness names, radar data, or even locations, were removed entirely. In some cases, the Air Force appeared to have investigated a sighting, but then omitted the case from the official index. It was like looking at a puzzle with key pieces deliberately thrown away. These gaps sparked a new line of inquiry. What happened to the cases that didn't make it into the archive? Some researchers, including former military officers, began to suggest that Blue Book was never the real investigation, that it was a public-facing operation meant to pacify curiosity while the deeper classified work continued elsewhere. According to some insiders, the really compelling cases, the ones with physical evidence, or multiple radar contacts, or clear indications of advanced flight characteristics, were never handled by Blue Book at all. Instead, they were routed through parallel intelligence channels, the CIA, the NSA, and Special Access Air Force programs with names and budgets that remain undisclosed to this day. And if that sounds like speculation, consider this. The U.S. government has since confirmed it continued investigating UFOs long after Blue Book closed. In 2017, the existence of a previously unknown Pentagon program was revealed. AATIP, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. Funded with $22 million in black budget money and run through the Defense Intelligence Agency, AATIP quietly investigated military encounters with unidentified aerial phenomena from the early 2000s until at least 2012, and possibly beyond. Luis Elizondo, the former head of AATIP, went public in 2017, stating that not only were these objects real, but that they often demonstrated performance capabilities far beyond any known technology. He described craft that could accelerate instantly, defy the laws of inertia, and travel underwater or through the atmosphere with no visible means of propulsion. In 2021, a report from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence reviewed 144 military encounters with UAPs. Only one was explained. The others? Still under investigation. And in 2023, during congressional hearings, intelligence whistleblowers testified under oath that the U.S. government possesses craft of non-human origin, that retrieval programs exist, that private contractors are working with materials recovered from unknown sources. It's worth noting, none of this was part of Project Blue Book, and yet everything about Blue Book pointed in this direction. Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who had once been hired to dismiss the phenomenon, became one of its most vocal advocates. After Blue Book's closure, he founded the Center for UFO Studies and spent the rest of his life investigating reports from around the world. In his later years, he openly criticized Blue Book's methodology, saying it was more concerned with public relations than discovery. He believed the government had actively suppressed data. Others agreed. Former Air Force personnel who worked under Blue Book would later admit that certain cases were above their clearance level, that they were told to stop asking questions, that some files were taken away by unknown parties and never returned. Even Captain Edward Ruppelt, the program's first director, became increasingly skeptical after leaving the Air Force. In his memoir, he hinted that the unexplained cases should not be ignored, that perhaps, someday, we'd understand what they really meant. So, what was Blue Book really? To some, it was a sincere, if flawed, attempt to make sense of an unprecedented phenomenon. To others, it was a containment strategy, a firewall between the public and the unknown. But the most compelling theory? That it was only the surface layer, that the real investigation always continued, under different names, buried under layers of classification, hidden behind need-to-know protocols and national security euphemisms. And that raises an uncomfortable question. If the government has known more than it admits, what does it know now? Today, the conversation has shifted. UFOs are no longer a fringe obsession. They're a topic of national interest. Navy pilots speak openly. Senators demand briefings. And government agencies use phrases like non-human intelligence with alarming casualness. The stigma is fading. The secrecy, less so. And the echoes of Blue Book remain. The language, the patterns, the deflection. Back then, sightings were written off as Venus, swamp gas, balloons. Now they're labeled as drones, foreign adversary systems, sensor anomalies. But the core question remains unchanged. What are we seeing in the skies? Who controls them? And why has the truth been managed for so long? Project Blue Book is long gone. The paper files are aging in archives. The participants are fading into history. But the mystery? It's more alive than ever. And if you believe the right people, we've barely scratched the surface. So, was Project Blue Book a bold scientific endeavor? A bureaucratic dead end? Or just the tip of something far deeper and far more hidden? For nearly 2 decades, the U.S. government investigated what it couldn't explain, then quietly told the public there was nothing to worry about. But the sightings never stopped. The evidence never disappeared. And the questions only got louder, because if they weren't just chasing lights in the sky, if they did find something they couldn't control, then maybe, just maybe, the files weren't lost at all. They were buried, on purpose,